All right. So let's get into some details about this program. Um, we will cover basically all the information that you've received via email. Can be a little overwhelming, I know, lots of documents to look at. So here we are, just trying to make sure that everything um, is clear and you all have a chance to ask questions. So as we go, feel free to um, turn your mic on and ask, um, for clarity. I'll make sure to keep the chat open as well and take a look at that as we go. So we are very, very proud and honored to continue to be able to offer this funding program, which is pretty much annual. We had things looked a little different in 2020, and in 2021 the program was put on hold. So last year was the first year back post-pandemic, but it is generally an annual program that supports free outdoor performances, festivals, workshops, all the things that you all mentioned in Seattle parks happening between April and November. It's a really great partnership between the Office of Arts and Culture and Seattle Parks and Recreation. And it really has a focus on supporting under-resourced communities. That's in part why we have an eligible parks list and an ineligible parks list. The ineligible parks list is, they have resources separate from this program. And so Arts and Parks is really intended to fill in any gaps that existing other funding programs might create. Every year it's a competitive application process. So congratulations you all for being selected. There were 31 projects selected out of 65 this year by our panel of 4 community members. So that's sort of a bit of background. And we have different roles. Each partner in this program has different roles. So you'll be talking to me about all things contracting, invoicing, getting payments to you, reporting and evaluation. All that stuff happens through the Office of Arts and Culture. And you'll go to parks for things like permitting, any support with, figuring out the logistics of your project, your event. And then Parks also tends to list events on their blog. So I can share in the chat an example of what that has looked like in the past. I'll say that we will both do our best to amplify any promotional materials that you provide us and draw attention to this series of events. One of the things that will be coming out is just kind of an award announcement to share with our community the news that you all have been selected to produce your events. All this to say that the promotional side of things is really primarily up to you, and we'll support you as we can. So just keep that in mind as you're budgeting for your event. Speaking of budgeting, here's a reminder of what your funding may and may not be used for. So we've got a few different sections of this slide. So you may use this funding for the following list, sorry. Of course, there's other things that this funding can go towards, but mainly we've seen people who are awarded pay artists with this funding, spend funding on marketing, any project management or personnel costs associated with planning and developing and executing these projects, any supplies or equipment rentals, of course, your permit fees and insurance fees can be covered with this funding, and up to 10% of the award amount can be used for food or refreshments. What you can't use the funding for is listed on the right. So fundraising, if your event has a fundraising component, we should talk because since this is taxpayer dollars, these are sort of restrictions based on our state laws. Religious services are not to be supported by this grant. Any gifts or awards, if you are doing like a competition or something where you want to provide prizes or things like that, you'll have to secure outside funding or funding outside of this grant for those things. General like operating costs or organizational administrative costs that don't have to do with this, the project that you're producing for Arts and Parks, should not be covered with this funding. And then if you're going to purchase any equipment rather than renting, that is also a no-no according to our funding guidelines. Some things that I do want to point out based on feedback from previous awardees is this is a rain or shine program. So, you know, our weather can be a little unpredictable. It can get really, really hot for no apparent reason. It can be really, really rainy. It can be very windy. So keep these things in mind as you're planning your event. You know, you may want to think about how a park's infrastructure can support the event that you want to produce. You may also want to keep some room in your budget for things like tents or other ways that you can put up a temporary shelter, things like that. And then our panelists this year really wanted to emphasize that if you're planning on producing a longer event, that it's a really good idea to budget for refreshments for your audience. Or, you know, if it's happening during a meal time or something like that, it's always a good idea to not have the lack of food be a barrier for participation. Any questions so far? All right. Feel free to stop me as we're going. Some reminders and notes here. Your award must be used for the project that you proposed in your application. So the panel selected you all based on what you proposed. And so if you want to change the scope of what you proposed, things like date changes or parks changes, those things are fine. But if the general concept that you applied with is something that you don't feel like you can execute anymore, we should definitely be talking because this is, you know, what you were evaluated on. So we want the award to support that. Of course, before you get started on your project, you'll want to read and sign your contract. I won't be able to release any funds to you until that happens. And we will need your the approval of your park permit to be in place before I have a contract drafted up for you. I'm seeing a question in the chat, a question to me, how can we get a copy of the project we proposed? I believe you should be able to log into your Flux account, the portal in which you applied, and I can drop a link to that. This is the grant system that our departments and some other city departments are using to manage grants. So if for some reason you're not able to see the application that you submitted, I can totally help you with that. So just let me know. One other thing to note about contracts is that we no longer have a COVID vaccination mandate. So for those of you who were had that in your contract last year, it's not going to be part of this year's contract. So yeah, hopefully that eases some of the stress. Another reminder here is that you'll want to give credit to the City of Seattle in any promotional materials that you create. So that can be just the generic City of Seattle logo, since we have both arts and parks departments. You're of course welcome to include both the Arts, Office of Arts and Culture and Seattle Parks and Rec logos, or just the one City of Seattle logo is fine. If your award is over $1,300, you can invoice before your event, again, after your contract is signed, and the first payment would be for planning and preparation for your project. So we, can't release funds without having something that you're invoicing us for. So that first payment is really intended to be paying you for what you're putting into the preparation of your project. And then, of course, after your project is complete, you can invoice once more. Question on the invoicing: does the invoice have to be 50-50, or can we have a larger amount in the first payment, since we have upfront costs more than day of expenses? Unfortunately, no, we can't go over 50% for that first payment. Any other questions? All three logos, City, Arts, and Parks. Yes, so the info sheet that you got from me should have a link to the Arts logo. I believe the Parks logo was sent in a separate email, but hopefully before we jump off today, I can drop some links in the chat for you. Okay, it looks like maybe finding your application in Flux might not be a thing. So if you want to see your project proposal, plan to follow up with me. Some things to keep on your radar when you are producing your event, or actually the day of your event. You'll want to sort of take some notes on some numbers and some anecdotes. Oops. In Flux, that's where you'll be submitting your invoices, your payment requests. And in your final invoice, you also have a final report built in. And these are some questions that we'll be asking you. So when you're out there at the park, try to get a head count or an estimate of how many people are in your audience. Make sure you're keeping track of how many artists you have participating and how many of those artists are getting paid by these funds. And then, generally you'll want to just kind of give us a sense of who showed up. You can upload images that are either photos of the event itself or promotional images. And then we'll want you to kind of tell us, how it went for you, what could we do differently in the future. We're always trying to improve how we support you all, and how we can adjust programs as needed. So just keep an eye out for these types of things as your event is happening. All right, so next steps are to follow up with me if you haven't already, to say, yes, I want to accept these funds. Any changes that you might anticipate for the project, whether that be date or park location. Again, if you think that you can't execute on the proposal that you submitted in your application, let's talk. If you haven't yet filled out your W-9, I think some of you I need to follow up with, just having sent me like a PDF version of your W-9. It's really preferred. Our accounting team really prefers to have everything in our in the online form, or submitted through the online form that we have. And make sure your Flux profile is current. So again, go to seattle.flux.io and log in, make sure that, if you didn't list a fiscal sponsor or something like that, if you have moved, if you have changed your phone number or your email, things like that, make sure that those things are all current in your Flux record. And then March 18th is a date you should have in your calendar. That's just a few weeks away. By then is when you want to submit your park use forms to parks. And we'll go over those forms in just a second, but all those forms will go to the artsandparks@seattle.gov email. And then your next steps are to work on pulling the details of your event together. Seeing some questions in the chat. Please confirm prep costs can be invoiced up to 50% in pre-production. How long will the payment process take? So it takes 4 to 6 weeks for us to get a payment out. Sometimes it happens sooner than that, but no guarantees. So please plan accordingly. And yes, so that's up to 50% for pre-event expenses. Also, funding cannot be released until contract is signed and park use permit approved, correct? Yes, that is correct. So you won't be able to invoice in Flux. I mean, there won't be the option even until we have your contract signed and in the system. Are you able to partner with another organization? Yes. If you want to, if you have specific ways that you are thinking of partnering, or any more details on that you want to discuss, let me know. Does the check have to go to the fiscal sponsor? If you listed a fiscal sponsor in your application, the check will go to the fiscal sponsor. That's their function, right? They're managing the money. So if you would rather not go through a fiscal sponsor, and we need to make adjustments, let's talk about that. Yeah, Susan.
Just for clarification about the W-9. So we have our fiscal sponsor, and who's also here.
Mm-hmm.
And so do I ask them to fill out the online form?
Yes.
Because I only have the PDF. Okay. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Martin, I'll talk to you.
Got it.
Question. Claudia.
I just have one, just a clarification about partnering with another organization. So as long as the big idea is still the same, that same idea you proposed, say, for example, I mean, this is just an idea that I thought of. I'm providing the art classes and maybe they provide like another component to the event, as long as my initial idea is still involved.
Yeah, are you thinking that, well, I guess I should say, we can only make the contract with one entity.
Right.
So if you're going to have a partner, just know that only one of you, ideally you, or the business entity or organizational entity that you're going through, would hold the contract and receive all the payments. So you're welcome to then distribute those funds accordingly. Or if you are expanding the scope of your project by bringing in another partner, that's totally fine.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's better words. Expanding the scope. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Okay, cool.
Okay, it looks like you can find your application in Flux. So try that before coming to me about it. Let's see. If you have a fiscal sponsor, they fill out the W-9. Yes, that is correct. Are we able to partner with corporations for sponsorships? Yes. Yes. I don't know.
Does that need to be, those funds need to be like reported back to you? Is that considered like fundraising? I don't, how, Or is that just to expand again the scope of the?
Yeah, you can include that in your final report, but there are plenty of events that are being funded, some of you here that have, festivals or something that involve lots of other sources of income, whether that income is in cash, or it's, volunteer time or donated food, things like that. So that's all well and good. Okay, I don't know if we have Annabelle here, but hopefully Carl, I think, will be able to help us with this next part. We have all the parks files. Oops, gosh, I keep doing that. Sorry. All the parks files. You should have received a zip folder from Annabelle or from the generic Arts and Parks email. And there are a lot of things in here. Each of these folders has things in it. The main folder has other things in it. So where should we start? I can, let me just stop sharing this so I can share the other thing. And Carl, I don't know if you have a preamble that you want to go through.
Well, I guess just a couple of short highlights that are really important. In addition to the deadline, so your dates aren't reserved until the application has been reviewed and you get a confirmation. So I know a lot of people have dates out there that they want to have their event. So make sure to get the applications in to Arts and Parks at seattle.gov as soon as possible so that they can review those as well and get those sent over. One thing that everybody should be aware of, if you haven't done it before, getting insurance can be a challenge. And most insurance companies do not want to actually provide the insurance that the city of Seattle requires. And so sometimes there's a little bit of a back and forth that you are involved with in getting the correct insurance for your event. The correct insurance, pretty much anybody can get, but sometimes they depending on who you're going through, they can make it a little bit harder because if they give us what we require, then if anything were to happen, they'd have to pay up, and insurance companies don't necessarily want to pay. So that's kind of very high level stuff. Alex here has a great example of a certificate. Very important things. One thing that might be a little bit new for some folks is so the general commercial liability is $1 million unless you're having a bounce house. If you're having bounce houses, it's $2 million for general liability. If you're getting very creative, like hanging apparatuses and other things like that, there might be other needs for liability, but the general is $1 million unless you have bounce houses. If you keep scrolling down a little bit, Alex, on this screen right here, the second box right here, it says automobile liability. So if you are looking to drive into a park, not a parking lot, but if you need vehicle access within a park, first thing is not all parks allow vehicles in them. But second, if you need to drive in, you would have to have $1 million in general liability. And usually what that means is that second row has to have $1 million listed for any auto or hired and non-owned autos. So got a couple different options that you can click there. Yes, so yes, 1 million. Yeah, Alex put the notes in there, so that's great. And then the rest of this, the most important part here is if you keep scrolling down a little bit, this last section, that left corner needs to say City of Seattle, and the description box, ideally, if it's blank, that works just fine. If there's words that are placed in there, that potentially impacts the validity of the certificate. And insurance groups, companies like to add little things in there all the time. And then down below, if Alex keeps scrolling, so there's two examples of approved endorsements. If we get these two, it is very straightforward and easy to do. It just needs to say City of Seattle. And you'll see in the top right corner of that page, you'll see CG 2012. That is the name of the endorsement document that you're looking for. There's also a second one on the lower page, which is CG 2026. Both of these are approved. If we have those, then you basically have your insurance covered. Not all insurance companies have these documents, and so there are other ones. It just delays the process of getting your insurance approved. Insurance is very complicated, and unfortunately, it's one of those things that sometimes you just have to work with your agent to make sure that they're giving you what we are requesting. And so sometimes there is a little bit of back and forth that you might have to have a conversation with either myself or Annabelle to get them to give you the correct information.
Carl, did you say that they should have both the CG 2012 and CG 2026?
Just need one.
One. Okay.
Just need one. Yep.
Can I?
Yeah, so Jenny, yeah, so another Davis, Jenny asked the question about a band driving in. So depending on your park, if they need to physically drive into the park past a parking lot, past a bollard, then yes, you need the $1 million general liability for vehicles. And Susan, you had a question?
Okay, yeah, I had a lot of problems, as Carl knows from last year. I came in late to the organizing, and I had never done a park project before. I'd done them on the street, and it had been a bunch of years, so the insurance companies changed. So if you have old information, there was a lot of learning I had to do. So start that early. So my question is, are you saying general liability $1 million? If there's a bouncy house, another $1 million? And if there's an auto on the park, another $1 million. Is that what you're saying?
Not quite. So if we go back up to the certificate, Alex. So basically what you're talking about here on the certificate, if it's a bounce house, that first row of boxes right there where it says general liability, if you have bounce houses, that needs to be $2 million.
Okay.
And then separately, that second row of boxes where it says automobile liability, it needs to say 1 million. Now, the other bad news I have for you though, Susan, is for your particular park at Othello, we actually don't allow vehicles in there. Right. So you don't actually need the vehicle liability because we don't allow it for that particular park, unfortunately.
So is that 3 million total if that park allows cars to come in?
It doesn't quite work that way. So basically how the liability works is you have $2 million general liability that doesn't cover anything that would happen if an automobile caused it. So let's say an automobile hit somebody, you would have $1 million general liability if that automobile hit somebody. And then you would have, let's say somebody got hurt at a bounce house, you'd have 2 million for that. They're literally two line items. Think of it as like, one is your repair budget, another one is your food budget. Like they're just entirely different items and how they pay out. And so as the event organizer, the easiest route to go is, and this is following up on Jenny's point here, the easiest route to go is that you want to have general liability under your insurance. If you don't do it that way, we can look at each individual organizer, but they need the exact same insurance that we're requiring of you. And we would need it for every single vehicle that comes in. That's going to slow down the approval process and all kinds of stuff for you. It's just much easier as an organizer to get, you just cover any autos. Unless you only have one. If you have one, it's a little easy, but every auto it's just adds more complexity to an already challenging document.
And I also want to note, because of all the issues I had last year figuring it out, is that City of Seattle endorsement is another thing that was difficult to get. So again, do that early, and I eventually found a really good insurance agent who helped with that process. But I will not do it that late again. So yeah.
And then as part of your zip file, you as Alex is bringing up here, this document is written for insurance agents. It's not written for like the average person to understand, because it's a lot there. When I first started my job, it took me 6-8 months to figure out really what all of this insurance stuff said. It's very legalese. It's very specific. One word can make an entire difference on whether or not your insurance is approved or not approved. So as Susan mentioned, get working on it early. I do unfortunately deny 50% of the insurance that's submitted on the first try. That's a horribly high number, but that's unfortunately how it works out. But these are all the different requirements and whatnot of different fees for it. And you'll see one of the biggest ones there is if you have like a carnival type ride, think of like a motorized, what do you call them that you see at some places, get bucked off a motorized, what do you call them?
A bull, like a
Bull, thank
riding?
you. Yeah. Like a motorized bull or something like that. That would be something that would pop it up to $5 million because of the safety that's involved of potentially falling off that motorized bull. Carnival rides, very common, anything, any big stuff like that. But most people don't end up there.
Carl, do you happen to know if Judkins allows vehicles to be?
Yes, Judkins, we can have vehicles in there. Note that any vehicles that are driving off of on grass areas do have to have wood as well. So that is an added expense. Gasworks is okay as well. Most parks are. Othello is one of our few that doesn't because of every park is different in Seattle. And Othello was built kind of very close to the ground. So all of our sprinkler heads are not very deep, et cetera. When it comes to who to go through for insurance, we don't have anybody specifically that we recommend. But what we can do is I can send Annabelle some groups that we have worked with in the past that have been able to provide the insurance that we request, and then she can send it out to everybody.
Yeah, for other programs that I have worked on, the first point of contact that you might want to make is if you have an insurance policy, an existing like renter's policy or something like that, see if they have event insurance. That's usually a good place to start. Yeah, Margot, I see your hand up.
Hi, I have a question.
Mhm.
So we've been doing our event at Judkins for over 20 plus years, and we do have vehicles that have been allowed to go on to the field, at least for vendors to drop off, to drive up. So is this a new rule? Because we've never encountered this.
You talk about the wood? No, that's been a rule for the entire time I've been in this office, which is about 7 years. We do it for the protection and safety of the park. Because when vehicles drive in the park, we historically get damage if they're just driving on grass. And unfortunately, your event has created a number of damages over the years to the turf.
Okay, so what wood are you talking about?
Just just standard wood. I mean, anything you get from
Plywood?
like plywood. Yeah, just plywood that you can get from the store. That basically disperses the weight of the car, and it also makes sure that we don't pop any sprinkler heads. And that, basically we're trying to drive on the cement as much as possible. But if they drive on grass or they're parking on grass, they're actually parking on wood so that they don't just like kind of sink into the ground.
Which part of the park are you talking about?
The entire park. So any park that has grass.
Okay, because we have, like I said in the past, this has never come up. So I'm just confirming. So you're saying that vehicles cannot drive, like even the Parks Department, when they drop off all of the chairs and things that they deliver to us, they drive onto the grass with the Parks Department trucks. When the porta potties are delivered, they drive onto the field to drop them off. So you're saying they can't do that?
They shouldn't be doing that, no, because that has the potential for impact to the parks.
Right.
And
so the Parks Department does that all the time. They bring stuff to us and they drive, and that's part of City of Seattle. So I'm just a little confused. Right.
Well, what Parks Department does, I mean, in theory, the Parks Department, our staff, they know where everything is, what they should be doing and shouldn't be doing. It's a policy across the board, has been for, like I said, the entire time I've been in this office, that vehicles have to drive on wood for the protection of the park.
Lots of details. I see that we're at 2:01. I have some more time if folks want to continue kind of going through these files. Something to note here for the question about logos. In this zip file, there are a couple Seattle Parks and Recreation logo files and a document here under in the marketing folder of the zip file. And if you need to drop off, totally understand. And just, yeah, follow up with me or the parks, artsandparks@seattle.gov email. For anyone who has a little bit more time, maybe we can talk about the park use permit forms. Does that sound good, Carl?
Yeah, I got a little bit of time here. Yep.
Okay, sweet. Where should we start? Sorry that this is kind of small on your screen, probably. AIP 2023 info on types of permits.
Probably just the application. Everything else is fairly self-explanatory, I think.
Okay.
If somebody has a question about it, though, they can definitely add that. So basically, the application, for those that have done this before, it hasn't changed all that much. We reformatted a little bit for ADA purposes so that it could be more readable online. Pretty much otherwise, it's the same application. If you scroll down to page 5, that's basically where the information needs to start being filled out. And so, yeah, there you go. And so this is all just very straightforward stuff. If you keep on scrolling there, basically the biggest thing is we want the general information on these documents. Your event name, we definitely need to know the park as well as where in the park, depending on the park that you're at. Some parks are very large, other parks are not, not that big at all. And so you need to really know where your event is being set up. And we need that a very detailed map of how you're setting up in the park, what you're setting up in the park. It does not have to be a professional map by any means, but it needs to be something that is readable so that, you were showing it to a friend, they would know where to go to a booth, or where the portable restrooms are being placed, or, little stuff like that. And then in regards to all this stuff, the annual event helps us out if there is, if you've done it in the past and what changes you're doing. So it helps speed up the process through there. Adding a event purpose, is helpful. And so much of this application is just kind of answer all the questions. Anything that in red should be answered on this application. And then right here for the site plan, it talks about the different things that we're looking for as part of that map. Part of that zip file has an example of a site map. And then when it comes to equipment, really need to know all types of equipment, whether or not, if you're in a park that has a fountain, or if you're doing a 2-day event, need to know if the sprinklers need to be turned off, fountains need to be turned off, stuff like that. Otherwise, you might get wet. And same with the map describing things. We also want, what are you setting up in the park? So that's what the event setup piece is. And one big item to remember is that any trash that's generated by your event needs to be removed by your event and disposed of outside of the park. And I think that's kind of straightforward on most of these. You scroll down a little bit more, Alex. One of the big questions that does pop up is, so do mention if you have any sales, but if you scroll down a little further, so amplified sound, you can't start amplified sound on the weekends until after 9 o'clock. It has to be done by 10 p.m. Make sure that when you're doing amplified sound and when you're setting it up on your map, really take into consideration the neighborhood that you're in. So ideally what we want to have is the least impact if you lived across the street from the park. And so how can I create amplified sound in a direction that doesn't rattle the neighbors' windows? Some parks, this is very logical. Other parks, it takes a little bit more effort. Also, if you're requesting power, make sure to list it here. Some of our parks have 20 amp power, which is basically your standard household power. Some of our parks have 50 amp. That takes a larger plug, but allows for a lot more electricity and a lot more uses. Not all of our parks have them. for either the 20 or the 50. It really kind of depends. Even some parks that do have the power, it depends on where you're setting up in the park. There might not be power nearby where you're setting up. And then on the special request number 8, this is kind of anything that hasn't been touched on. If you have a thought or an idea that you want to do, this is a good place to kind of make sure you're mentioning it. And that's something that can be looked into. And kind of the sky's the limit on what this question can be. But if you're trying to do something that is more than setting up tables and tents and having performances, this might be a spot to ask that question. One that has come up in the past is, can we have fire poi? The answer is yes, you can. But the longer answer is there's a lot of pieces to it if you wanted to have that type of a performance. Trying to think of other ones. Could you have a rocket launch? Like a Cub Scout rocket launch where it goes up in the air and comes down. The answer is yes, but with a lot of restrictions and requirements. And so little stuff like that, if you're thinking of doing something a little bit outside the box, that's where you would want to throw the special request. And so Julia's asking about power options. Yeah, so basically there is no conclusive list, but partly because it is so much dependent on where you're setting up, what you're setting up, how you're setting it up. So basically, if you have those questions, send those to Annabelle at the Arts and Parks, and we can basically look into it and get better answers for you. In regards to Siobhan's question here, that program is still happening in select parks. I don't have the list in front of me. She's talking about 10% gross sales waived, so that if you have like a food vendor at a park, that fees can be waived, but they can only be waived at select parks that have been approved as part of a pilot. And so that's another one that you're going to want to ask Annabelle about. And I think that's pretty much it for the application. Yes, so 7, the amplified sound is 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. on Saturdays and Sundays. It's 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. on Monday through Friday. And here's a great example of a map, nice, and it doesn't have to be anything super duper fancy, but just need to know where things are being placed, what you're trying to do, and what you're bringing into the park.
I guess just the only other thing to note here is the release forms. If you will be, publishing photos that you take, or for photos that you submit to us, you'll want to make sure that you have photo releases for those. There are some cases in which, people are in public. It's a public event, and so there's sometimes some interpretations of, since it's public, you're in the public eye, and you're consenting to have your photo taken and published, but always a good idea to get consent, especially with people under 18. All right. Thank you for sticking around for a few extra minutes. Yeah, Laura?
I only
Laura,
had
sorry.
So it's okay. People call me all sorts of things. So I'm also a lawyer. So you just brought up something. I'm an entertainment lawyer that just sparked me. If we do an outdoor show and we are going to have people filming, obviously, because, that's the long tail benefit partially of doing this. I have not before at a public event had to get individual clearances. What I have typically done is put signage up saying, by attending this event, you are willingly participating and you are aware that you may be intentionally or inadvertently included in any kind of content capture. Do you know whether that's acceptable to the city? Okay.
Yes.
That's what I would recommend to folks then, because that has worked for us for every film permit that we've ever done, to let us do
Yeah.
it that way.
Great. That's a great solution. So yeah, make sure you kind of post something on the perimeter of your event, or kind of central to where folks can see it as they're entering the grounds or something like that, to just state
I'll
that.
I'll send the wording that we have for ours that I have in a file to you, Alex, and you can share it with the group.
Okay,
With the
perfect.
note, this is not legal advice for everyone. It's just what has worked for our production company.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Laura.
I don't think it'll be a gray area though, because it is used almost by every film company there is, because unless you're a hired extra, if you're watching from the side, that's pretty much the only solution is if there's a lot of people.
Yes, I will send out a recording of this meeting. And yeah, lots of helpful stuff was shared. Also, I will save the chat, and if there's anything in the chat that can be shared out with you all, I'll get that to you. I know Laura also dropped a link to an insurance provider that other event producers have used. Susan, you have a question?
Yeah, does it matter if we get the permit through Parks or Special Events Committee?
Yes, this is, you'll have to go through Parks. Special Events is is housed in a different department, and is usually, yeah, not related to events that happen outside of Parks domain.
Yeah, I mean, Susan, so yeah, you need the park use permit, and then, you know, depending on the size scope of an event, then you may need also to have a citywide special event permit as well.
Yeah, because we are gonna have the food trucks on the street. And we will at least do, you know, parking, restriction at the park. But if we have the petting zoo again, then we have to close the street. So, but I'll fill out this form, and then I'll also talk with Randy, or, okay.
Yeah, you'd want to get the park permit in ASAP, but yeah, and then also start working on the citywide approach for it. And for those on the call, if you didn't already know, when it comes to a petting zoo of any kind for like farm animals, basically you can't do it in a park. So if anybody was thinking of that, basically we actually have a no hooved policy in parks. The one exception being SPD obviously has horses that they do ride in the park. That's the only exception that's made for the hooved policy.
Right, we wanted to have Buffalo Soldiers that I had at the parade, but we can't have them in the park, so we haven't been able to invite them. All right, I lost my other question. Thank you. I'll ask you later. Thank you. This is very helpful to me. I really appreciate all of this, because I came in the middle last year, so this is great.
Yes, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, there's a lot of information, a lot of details to go over. And, you know, it's even more complex with multiple points of contact for different different parts of the program. So
I did think of my last question. I'm sorry. Just one
sure,
last question.
yeah.
As far as the layout, as we're getting booths coming, I don't know exactly what the layout is, but the funding for us is for the performers. So, but the park wants to know everything. So what do you want, a preliminary and then a follow-up as we know how many booths we have for the setup?
Yeah, preliminary is fine. We definitely need hard numbers about 30 days out. So does citywide. As part of citywide, they also have requirements for vendors in certain categories qualify for higher responsibilities, basically, that need to be double checked. So, and to Margot's point, yes, as an Arts and Parks grant funded program, your park use fees are waived.
Great. That's awesome. So you don't need to build that into your budget after all. Cool. Well, I think we are good to wrap. If anyone has any follow-up questions, I'll drop my email in the chat. And I believe you should have, there are a couple other emails for parks.
And yeah, and so very important that you send your application as soon as you can to artsandparks@seattle.gov. Because if you send it directly to me, some people do email me directly. It doesn't get processed the way it should. And what ends up happening is that is when fees are applied. So you need to send all, fill out that application and send it directly to Arts and Parks. And then they are going to be the ones that route it to me. And by them routing it, they're approving it as an Arts and Parks program. And that's where your fees get waived. If it comes directly to me, your fees don't get waived.
Okay, could I just jump in real quick, Carl, just to confirm? So yes, because I'm looking at the application now and I'm about to send it. So it says to email it to special events office, but Arts in the Park. So what's that email address so everyone just got it?
Alex put it in the chat. It's Arts in Parks with an S at seattle.gov.
Okay.
Yeah, if it comes to me, it slows down the process. ARTSINPARKS@seattle.gov.
Okay, and so that would just be the applications for the park use and then special events application, correct?
Special
What was that last
events,
part?
the special
Oh, go ahead.
events application would go through the special events office. So
Right.
if you're, if you have a larger event, as was discussed, there's the parks element, but then there may be other things like street closures or mainly street closures.
Yeah, Margot, for your event, yeah, you want to reach out to the special events office like you have in the past. I don't know if you worked with Randy last year. He's the new chair of the special events committee.
Right, so I send the special events application to the special events department. And which application you guys, I'm sorry, I had a lot going on.
So,
which application goes to the arts in the park?
Yeah, the Arts in the Parks is the park use permit application.
Oh, the park use permit, okay. Okay, okay, thank you so much.
Carl, what can folks reach out to you for? Are you the person to clarify X, Y,
for
or
Arts
Z?
and Parks, specifically, because there are a number of nuances that are specific to the program itself, it's best for them to reach out to the Arts and Parks email and talk to Annabelle or whoever else might be assisting in that office. Because if folks come directly to me, I might actually tell them a no that Arts and Parks may tell them yes for. So I come in basically on the park side of the process and determining if there's anything that could potentially have an impact to the park, if the park's available, and stuff like that. But sometimes people
you're at level 2. You're past the wall.
Yeah, most conversations should be had with Arts and Parks at the front, and then when the confirmation comes out, I may have some follow-up questions directly, and that'll be included in the email where people can just respond directly to that email.
Super helpful, thank you. And has Parks worked out anything with the special events office around those permit fees or application fees?
No, because special events office is actually is guided by city ordinance. It's actually not. It's not even policy or procedure. It's an actual ordinance that controls that. And so they're actually very rigid on what they have to charge and what they have to can waive fees for. So I don't even think they can waive fees actually, but I could be wrong. I'm not in that office, so nobody quote me on that. But yeah, all this stuff only applies to the park use permit.
Great. Well, thanks again, everyone. Really appreciate your time, your thoughtful questions, and I'm excited to see your projects come to life. Thanks so much, Carl,
awesome.
for all of the technical information that you were able to share. And yes, I'll get a recording out to everyone and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to all this stuff. This sounds fantastic. So.
Mhm.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone. Take care.